Rome began as a cluster of huts along the banks of the Tiber, a small Latin settlement surrounded by rival tribes and ambitious neighbors. For centuries, it fought for survival, clawing its way through wars with Etruscans, Samnites, and Carthaginians. It wasn't built in a day. It was forged in conflict, shaped by necessity and hardened by discipline. The Roman Republic was founded in 509 BCE, after the last king was cast out. Power shifted to elected magistrates, and a Senate dominated by patrician families. Rome expanded cautiously at first, conquering nearby territories in Italy. But as it gained strength, its ambitions grew bolder. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome was no longer just an Italian power. It had become a Mediterranean force. With each victory, Rome absorbed new people, new lands, and new wealth. Roads were built, colonies were planted, Latin law spread like wildfire. But so did the burdens of empire, massive armies to supply, provinces to administer, and allies to pay off. The old systems of barter and bronze coinage could no longer keep up with the demands of a growing state. Trade routes stretched from the Atlantic coast to the deserts of North Africa, from the Alps to the Aegean Sea. The Republic needed a monetary system as bold and unified as its legions, a tool not only of commerce, but of cohesion, something that could bind this sprawling patchwork of cultures and economies into one functioning whole. This was not just the rise of Rome as a territorial empire, it was the rise of Rome as an economic power. And economic power requires a reliable, stable, trusted currency. That's where the denarius enters history. Born out of necessity during the Second Punic War, it wasn't merely a coin. It was a declaration of Rome's arrival as a global force. It made trade faster, armies stronger, and the Republic more connected than ever before. Before silver coins gleamed in the hands of Roman merchants and soldiers, the economy of Rome was a patchwork of barter, bronze, and improvisation. Cattle were once a standard unit of value. So much so that the Latin word for money, pecunia, comes from pecus, meaning livestock. Trade was clumsy. Payments were weighed, not counted. Value was measured in lumps of metal, not minted pieces. As Rome expanded beyond its hills and into a regional power, that primitive system began to crack under pressure. A growing population, a rising merchant class, and frequent military campaigns demanded something faster, lighter, and more standardized. In the early days, Rome borrowed ideas from the Greeks and Etruscans. They adopted bronze coinage called aes grave, large, heavy discs stamped with symbols. But these were impractical. They weighed down purses, slowed transactions, and couldn't meet the demands of a growing Mediterranean empire. Then came the crucible of war. In 218 BCE, Hannibal crossed the Alps with his war elephants, igniting the Second Punic War. Rome faced its greatest existential threat yet. The Republic needed to pay soldiers, fund fleets, and keep commerce flowing. And it needed to do it quickly and efficiently. Out of this chaos came a new coin, small in size but enormous in consequence. The denarius was born around 211 BCE. Made of nearly pure silver and roughly the size of a modern dime, the early denarius was stamped with the helmeted head of Roma on one side, and the divine twins Castor and Pollux on horseback on the other. It carried a face value of 10 bronze asses, hence its name, derived from deni, meaning 10 at a time. This wasn't just money. It was a new language of value. The silver used in these coins came from mines in Spain, recently captured by Roman forces. Suddenly, the Republic had both the metal and the means to mint coins in massive quantities. With a flick of the die, Rome could now pay troops, fund conquests, and grease the wheels of commerce. The denarius quickly became the backbone of Roman finance. It wasn't the first silver coin Rome had ever produced. Earlier attempts, like the quadrigatus and the victoriatus, were mostly for use in Greek-speaking regions. But the denarius was different. It was designed for Romans, by Romans, to be used across the Republic. It unified the economy like never before. Silver gave the denarius weight, not just physical weight, but psychological. A coin made of precious metal inspired trust. It didn't represent value. It was value. People accepted it not because of a law, but because of the metal it carried. And as long as the silver content remained stable, confidence in Rome's economy remained unshaken. Merchants embraced it. Soldiers were paid with it. Taxes were collected in it. Debts were settled, contracts written, and fortunes built on the denarius. And as Rome expanded, so did the reach of its currency. From the markets of Gaul to the bazaars of Asia Minor, the denarius became a symbol of Roman order, an echo of Latin power in foreign lands. But it also had another, more subtle function. The images stamped on each coin were miniature billboards of Roman identity. They reminded people, literate or not, who held the reins of power. The earliest denarii celebrated the Republic, its gods, and its founding myths. But over time, these designs would shift. The coins would become more personal, more political, more imperial. For now, though, in the late 3rd century BCE, the denarius was a quiet revolution. It didn't roar like the legions or shine like triumphal arches, but it moved through every hand in the Republic. It built roads, funded temples, fed armies, and bound together a civilization stretching from Spain to Syria. Its creation marked a turning point not just in Roman finance, but in Roman identity. The denarius was more than a tool. It was a mirror of Rome itself, orderly, disciplined, and ambitious. And in that small circle of silver lay the seeds of an empire. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had conquered most of the known Mediterranean world. Carthage was in ruins. Greece had been absorbed. Egypt, though still independent, was already dancing to Rome's tune. Roads stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Latin was spoken in courtrooms and markets. Roman law was becoming the foundation of civil order. And at the center of it all, in every shop, tavern, temple, and army camp, was the silver denarius. In this era of triumph, the denarius evolved from a war-born necessity into a symbol of Rome's global dominance. It wasn't just a coin anymore. It was Rome itself, carried in the pockets of millions, stamped with the faces of power, and accepted across continents. The average Roman citizen, the cives Romani, would earn a few denarii per day. A soldier might be paid about 225 denarii annually, with bonuses during successful campaigns. A loaf of bread could cost half a denarius. A bottle of wine, maybe one. With just a handful of coins, a citizen could navigate daily life, food, clothing, travel, and even taxes. The coin's weight remained consistent, around 3.9 grams of almost pure silver. This stability, in a world of uncertainty, built trust. People from Gaul to Judea began to see the denarius not just as a Roman currency, but as an international standard. In distant provinces, it circulated alongside local currencies. But in times of doubt, people hoarded the denarius. It was more than money. It was security. This trust in the coin was not accidental. It was policy. The Roman state was careful to maintain the silver content. especially during the late Republic and the early Empire. Leaders understood that the denarius wasn't just a means of exchange, it was a foundation of social order. If people stopped believing in the coin, they might stop believing in Rome. It was under Augustus, Rome's first emperor, that the denarius reached its golden age. After decades of civil war and political chaos, Augustus brought peace, reform, and financial order. One of his most powerful reforms was monetary. He stabilized the currency, re-established the mint in Rome, and fixed the weight and silver content of the denarius. He also centralized control over coinage. Only the emperor could issue gold and silver coins. This wasn't just a financial decision, it was ideological. By taking control of silver and gold, Augustus controlled the narrative. He stamped his image on the coins: calm, youthful, divine. The message was clear. Rome was strong, stable, and united under one man, and every denarius was a whisper of that power in your hand. As the empire expanded, so did the minting of coins. Mints were established in Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, Hispania, and Antioch. Coins were shipped across the empire, carefully weighed, often tested, and universally trusted. The denarius became the oil in the imperial machine. It paid soldiers, funded public works, supported grain imports from Egypt, and even reached barbarian kingdoms across the frontiers. Traders from Germania and Parthia took Roman coins, melted them, copied them, a backhanded tribute to their reliability and prestige. Even within Rome, the coin became part of cultural identity. Poets wrote of it, merchants praised it, tax collectors demanded it. Its sound, the ring of silver, was the background music of daily life. In homes, in forums, and brothels and bakeries, the denarius flowed like blood through the body of the empire. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The cost of empire was rising. Frontier wars never stopped. The bureaucracy grew. Emperors needed to buy loyalty from both the army and the people. Bread and circuses, yes, but also bribes and salaries. And all of this needed silver. Rome's mines, especially in Spain, were pushed to their limits. And while conquest had once been a source of treasure, the empire had now expanded as far as it could. There were fewer new lands to plunder, fewer rich cities to sack. By the late 1st century, the pressure on silver supplies was becoming evident. Yet the denarius still held strong, thanks to careful management, periodic reforms, and the sheer momentum of Rome's prestige. It was still trusted, still powerful, still everywhere. Even emperors like Vespasian and Trajan, who faced economic and military pressures, preserved the denarius's role as the economic backbone of the empire. These rulers understood, as long as the coin held, the empire held. For more than 2 centuries, the denarius was the closest thing the ancient world had to a global currency. It connected regions that spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and had never before shared a common identity. In Gaul, coins minted under Augustus were still in circulation 100 years later. In Judea, silver denarii appeared in local rebellions, and even in the Gospels. It was a denarius that was held up when Jesus was asked about paying taxes to Caesar. It had become more than money. It was a unit of culture, of authority, of civilization itself. But no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to gravity. And no currency, no matter how trusted, is immune to manipulation. The golden age of the denarius was not the end of its story. It was the high point before the long decline. The silver would begin to vanish. Trust would begin to erode. And the denarius, once the gleaming heart of Rome's economy, become a shadow of itself. Coins are small, but their message can be enormous. In Rome, the denarius wasn't just a means of payment, it was a miniature canvas of imperial propaganda. Every silver coin carried a message of power, legitimacy, divine favor, or victory. In a world without printing presses, newspapers, or mass media, coins were the most widespread communication tool the state possessed. In the Republic, early denarii featured mythological scenes: the helmeted head of Roma, the Dioscuri galloping on horseback, or symbols of the Republic's founding myths. These were collective images. They honored Roman traditions, gods, and shared civic ideals. The message was, this coin belongs to the Republic, to all Romans. But the moment politics began to fracture, as individual men began to seek power beyond the Senate, the images began to change. The late Republic saw a flood of self-promotion. Moneyers, often young aristocrats looking to make a name, minted coins celebrating their ancestors, their personal achievements, or even their political platforms. It was soft campaigning, etched in silver. By the time of Julius Caesar, coins had become tools of dominance. In 44 BCE, he became the first living Roman to put his own portrait on a coin. Before that, only gods and dead heroes had such honors. For many Romans, this was shocking, even sacrilegious. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. Caesar was no longer just a general or consul. He was something more. The denarius bearing his face, with the inscription, Caesar Dictator Perpetuo, Caesar, Dictator for life, announced his power more loudly than any speech. It traveled to the edges of the empire. Every time a Roman paid for bread, wine, or taxes, they saw his face. His authority became everyday reality. And then he was assassinated. But the revolution in coinage had already begun. Augustus, Caesar's heir and the first emperor, perfected the art of political messaging in metal. His coins showed him youthful and serene, sometimes even divine. The messages were subtle but constant: peace, prosperity, divine right, family loyalty. On the reverse, images of military victories, religious rites, or public buildings reminded citizens of imperial achievements. Coins became political manifestos. A new temple? It would appear on a coin. A victory in Germania? That too. Birth of an heir? Commemorated in silver. Even disasters were turned into victories. A coin might show a Roman god calming the storm, rather than the empire enduring hardship. Portraits themselves became political tools. Emperors controlled their image meticulously. They chose how they were seen, with laurel wreaths to evoke victory, bareheaded for humility, bearded to appear philosophical, clean-shaven to seem youthful. The coin became an act of branding, long before modern politicians had PR teams. And as the empire changed, so did the faces. Tiberius, cold and stern; Nero, youthful and theatrical; Vespasian, wrinkled and no-nonsense. Each image told a story, each denarius a statement. Here is your emperor. Here is who rules you. Here is what he wants you to believe. But the reverse side was often just as revealing. One might show the goddess Pax, holding an olive branch, signaling peace across the empire. Another might depict Jupiter hurling thunderbolts, a warning to Rome's enemies. Others praised Concordia, the harmony of the state, usually when there was no harmony at all. Even lies were cast in silver, and yet they worked. For most people in the empire, who never saw the emperor in person, the only image they had of him was on a coin. It shaped perception, built authority, and reinforced loyalty. Even in the provinces, where Latin was not the spoken language, The imagery of the denarius transcended words. A crowned emperor meant power. A victorious goddess meant safety. A temple meant Rome's favor. Coins were also used to claim legitimacy during times of civil war. When rivals fought for the throne, they minted their own coins, each trying to assert themselves as the true ruler. The faster your coin spread, the faster your power was accepted. Soldiers were paid in them, merchants used them, and the people learned whose face they were supposed to trust. In moments of crisis, emperors tried to buy loyalty with both currency and imagery. Septimius Severus, after seizing power in 193 CE, quickly flooded the empire with coins bearing the slogan Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. He hadn't yet restored anything, but the coin said otherwise. Perception mattered more than fact. The artistry, too, was not accidental. Roman engravers were skilled. They turned the emperor's features into icons. The curve of a nose, the set of a jaw, the style of a crown. Each detail was crafted for maximum impact. And while coins grew more rushed and crude in later centuries, their messages remained clear. The empire lives. The emperor reigns. Rome endures. Even in rebellion, coins played a role. When breakaway states appeared, like the Gallic Empire or the Palmyrene Empire, they minted their own versions of the denarius, often copying Roman styles. It was a way of saying, "We're Rome too," or at least, "we want to be." The denarius had become so powerful a symbol that even Rome's enemies mimicked it. For over 3 centuries, the denarius was the state's silver voice, constant, persuasive, and inescapable. It whispered loyalty, it shouted victory, it denied weakness and invented strength. It turned emperors into gods and revolts into fables. But every message has its limits. As the empire's real strength began to fade, the gap between what the coin claimed and what people experienced grew wider. The image still promised stability, but the economy said otherwise. The silver grew thin, the faces blurred, the slogans rang hollow. The denarius had once united Rome through trust and symbolism. But in the coming centuries, it would be hollowed out, literally and metaphorically. The denarius had once been a promise of silver, of value, of Rome's strength. For generations, it had fulfilled that promise. But as the empire stretched its borders and strained its treasury, the gap between promise and reality began to widen. The silver coin still bore the face of emperors, still echoed the old slogans of peace and glory. But underneath, something was breaking. Rome had built an empire on trust, and now that trust was beginning to corrode. The first cracks were almost invisible. A slight reduction in silver content, a marginal drop in weight. To most citizens, nothing seemed amiss. A denarius was still a denarius. But inside the mints of Rome, change was underway. It began under the reign of Nero. Though he is remembered today for extravagance and fire, Nero was also the first emperor to officially debase the denarius. Around 64 CE, he reduced its silver purity from 98% to around 93% and lowered its weight. To many, this seemed minor, barely noticeable. But it set a precedent. Nero's fiscal needs had overridden the coin's integrity, and others would follow. In truth, Rome's needs were growing faster than its income. The empire's size demanded a vast military. Border defense was endless and expensive. Roads, aqueducts, temples, all needed funding. Free grain for the poor, public games to appease the masses, bribes to keep the Senate pliant. Gold and silver simply couldn't flow fast enough. And so the emperors turned to the easiest solution: mint more coins. The only problem? Rome didn't have enough silver, so the denarius was stretched thinner, mixed with more base metals, reduced in weight, but always kept looking the same. Same face, same slogans. The illusion of value was maintained even as real value vanished. By the time of Septimius Severus in the early 3rd century, the denarius contained only about 50% silver. Within a few decades, under his successors, it dropped to 30%, then 20%, then less. The coin once trusted across continents had become little more than a sliver of silver-washed bronze. The public noticed. Prices rose. Merchants became hesitant. Soldiers demanded higher pay to compensate for shrinking value. Hoarding began. People saved the older, purer coins and spent the new, debased ones. Gresham's law in action. Bad money drove out good. In cities like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, the same denarius now bought less bread, less oil, less labor. Wages lagged behind. Inflation crept in, slowly at first, then rapidly. By the middle of the 3rd century, the Roman economy was beginning to unravel. And yet, emperors kept minting. During the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year stretch of civil war, barbarian invasions, and plague, coins poured from the mints at a frantic pace. Emperors rose and fell by the dozen, each issuing new coins to pay troops and buy loyalty, each further degrading the currency. One notorious example was the Emperor Gallienus. By his reign, the denarius was almost entirely copper, but the state still called it silver. In some cases, coins were so poorly made that the silver coating flaked off in hand. Trust, once Rome's greatest asset, had become a joke. To make matters worse, different regions began minting their own coins out of necessity. The empire's once unified currency system fractured. Confidence collapsed. Local economies reverted to barter. Gold, hoarded and hidden, became the true store of value. But gold was for the rich, and Rome's commoners were left with worthless silver. It wasn't just an economic failure, it was psychological. The denarius had been a symbol of unity. Its fall mirrored Rome's deeper crisis, not just of money, but of identity. If you couldn't trust the coin, could you trust the emperor, the laws, the system itself? People turned inward. Loyalty shifted from Rome to generals, to governors, to tribal chiefs. The state felt distant, unreliable, incapable. When an empire loses the faith of its citizens, no army can hold it together. In a last-ditch effort to stabilize the chaos, Emperor Diocletian attempted sweeping reforms around 294 CE. He introduced new coinage, the argentius, a more stable silver coin meant to replace the denarius. He also issued an edict on maximum prices, trying to control runaway inflation by law. But trust once broken is not easily restored. Though Diocletian's reforms slowed the bleeding, the damage had been done. The denarius, once the backbone of Roman commerce, disappeared. It had become too corrupted to save. The argentius briefly took its place, but even that eventually fell to the same fate. By the end of the 3rd century, the denarius was no longer minted at all. Its name survived in language, giving rise to currencies like the dinar and denier, but the coin itself was gone. A casualty of overreach, mismanagement, and desperation. And yet the story wasn't just about a coin. It was about what that coin represented. Trust, order, civilization. The fall of the denarius was not merely a monetary collapse. It was a reflection of the empire's soul unraveling. The people no longer believed, and when belief goes, So too does empire. By the middle of the 3rd century CE, the Roman world stood on a precipice. The borders were under constant attack. Civil wars erupted one after another. Plagues decimated the population, and the economy, once fueled by the silver pulse of the denarius, was spiraling into chaos. The Roman monetary system, once a triumph of order, was now a tangled mess of worthless coins, desperate reforms, and collapsing confidence. Inflation had become unmanageable. What used to cost a few denarii now required bags of coins. By the time of the Emperor Aurelian around 270 CE, the Roman state had completely lost control of its own currency. Soldiers demanded payment in goods or gold. Merchants refused official coinage. In the markets of Rome and the provinces, barter returned as a primary form of exchange. A pair of sandals might be traded for a chicken, a sack of grain for a piece of cloth. It was as if the imperial economy had regressed centuries, from silver commerce back to the raw urgency of survival. Coins still circulated, but few believed in them. Counterfeiting was rampant, but in truth, even official coins were barely better. Some were bronze, washed with a thin silver layer, a deception obvious to anyone who held one. The denarius, once proud and pure, had become symbolic of the rot eating away at Rome's core. And the crisis wasn't just economic. It became cultural, even existential. People no longer trusted their institutions. The state, which had once promised stability, was now a source of instability. Emperors came and went, often killed by their own guards, replaced by ambitious generals with no long-term vision. Each new ruler issued new coins, sometimes dozens of types, in a frantic attempt to restore value. None succeeded. The coinage, once the voice of Rome, had become its death rattle. One poignant example is the Antoninianus, introduced by Emperor Caracalla in 215 CE. Originally worth 2 denarii, it contained only about 1.5 denarii worth of silver. Within decades, it was so debased it was virtually all bronze. Still, it circulated. It had no choice. People had to use something, anything, to exchange value. The situation grew worse. By the late 3rd century, entire regions of the empire operated semi-independently. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, both issued their own coinage, mimicking Roman style but further eroding the shared economy. Rome's unity, political, military, and monetary, fracturing visibly. This wasn't just decline, it was systemic collapse. And amid this collapse, Rome's greatest invention, its money, had become meaningless. This is what happens when a civilization loses control of its currency. Prices detach from reality. Contracts fail. Taxes become unbearable. Hoarding replaces investment. Trade withers. Faith evaporates. It's not just that people get poorer. It's that they no longer know what anything is worth, including the state itself. Rome became a ghost of its former economic self. Only gold, rare and hoarded, retained value. The aureus, minted only in limited amounts, became the currency of the elite. Meanwhile, the masses were left with scraps of degraded copper and empty slogans. A two-tier system emerged: gold for the privileged, barter for the rest. The government solution? More reforms. Diocletian, one of the last great emperors, made a heroic effort to stop the spiral. Around 294 CE, he introduced a new system: a stabilized silver coin, Argentius, a standardized gold piece, Solidus, and a sweeping price control edict, the edict on maximum prices. It set fixed prices for hundreds of goods and services. It failed. Merchants ignored it. Goods disappeared from markets. The black market flourished. And worse, those who violated the price laws could be executed. The economy became a game of survival. It was Constantine, Diocletian's successor, who finally introduced a lasting reform. In 312 CE, he minted the solidus, a high-purity gold coin weighing about 4.5 grams. Unlike previous reforms, the solidus endured. It became the backbone of the Byzantine economy for the next 700 years. But this came at a price. The silver system, once the pride of Rome, was never fully restored. The denarius was dead. What had once unified a vast empire had become a memory. It had collapsed under the weight of imperial overreach, constant warfare, economic mismanagement, and the simple reality that even empires cannot mint value out of nothing. The fall of Roman money didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion of value, of trust, of meaning. And by the time Rome fell politically in the West, in 476 CE, its monetary collapse had already hollowed out its foundations. The coin had once been the heartbeat of the empire. Now, the empire beat no more. Though the Roman Empire crumbled, the denarius never truly disappeared. Its metal faded, its mints went silent, but its shadow stretched far beyond the fall of Rome. Like a ghost stamped in silver, the denarius echoed through the ages, in language, in law, in money itself. The word lived on. Denarius gave rise to the Arabic dinar, still used today in countries from Jordan to Algeria. The French denier, the Spanish dinero, the Italian denaro, all trace their roots back to the Roman coin. Even the English word, penny, comes from the Carolingian system that replaced Roman money but borrowed its structure. In medieval Europe, long after the emperors fell, rulers still looked to Rome as the gold standard, metaphorically and literally. Charlemagne, the great Frankish king, reformed his empire's coinage in the 8th century using the denarius as his model. His denier became the basic unit of medieval currency. The structure of pounds, shillings, and pence, the system used in Britain until the 1970s, was directly inspired by Roman accounting. Even in collapse, Rome taught the world how money could function and how it could fail. Its lessons were studied, copied, ignored, and rediscovered. The denarius became a symbol not only of empire, but of the very idea of a unified monetary system. A single coin that could pass from Spain to Syria, from Britain to Egypt, that was revolutionary. It proved that money was not just metal, but trust stretched across distance and time. In the Byzantine Empire, which survived for nearly 1,000 years after Rome's fall, the Roman legacy lived on in coin. The solidus, introduced by Constantine, became the bezant, a gold coin that merchants prized for its reliability. It was accepted across the Mediterranean and even as far as the Islamic caliphates in medieval Europe. Its strength rested on the same principle that once made the denarius great: purity, consistency, and imperial promise. Even in Islamic civilization, Roman coinage left its fingerprints. The early dinar, introduced under Caliph Abd al-Malik in the late 7th century, was modeled in weight and gold content on the Byzantine solidus. Though the inscriptions changed, now in Arabic praising Allah, the structure and function remained deeply Roman. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, scholars and kings alike looked back to Rome not just for its architecture and law, but for its currency. Collectors prized ancient denarii. Bankers studied Roman finance. Artists like Albrecht Dürer and Raphael filled their work with Roman coins, using them as symbols of classical wisdom and lost order. In modern archaeology, Roman coins remain among the most common and telling finds. Buried hoards across Europe reveal the movements of armies, the centers of trade, and the personal wealth of families long gone. Each coin is a message from the past, a frozen moment of power, crisis, or propaganda. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the denarius lies in its cautionary tale. It showed the world what money could achieve: vast infrastructure, shared identity, imperial cohesion. But it also revealed money's fragility. Strip away trust, inflate its value, debase its substance, and the system unravels. Slowly at first, then all at once. The denarius reminds us that currency is not just metal, it's belief. It's not the silver that gives it power, but the shared agreement that it holds value between rulers and ruled, between buyer and seller, between state and citizen. Rome broke that agreement, not in one moment, but over centuries, through short-term decisions, unchecked ambition, and mounting pressures. The fall of the denarius mirrored the fall of the empire, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 small cracks. And yet, something endured. The image of the emperor on a coin that lives on. From monarchs to presidents, leaders still mark money with their likeness. Currency remains a symbol of sovereignty. The idea of standardized coinage, backed by the state, spanning vast lands, that too persists. The euro, the dollar, the yen, modern echoes of Roman ambition. Even the practice of using coins for propaganda survives. Special issues commemorating victories, heroes, peace, or national pride all follow the Roman model. The denarius may be gone, but its fingerprints are everywhere. So the next time you hold a coin, whether euro or dollar, pound or peso, look at its face, its design, its message. Behind every symbol is a lineage. Behind every currency, a history. And behind much of it, Rome.